this month's C4 Certified Bitcoin Professional Committee live stream. This is going to be a little bit different than the ones we've done in the past. We've got a couple of guests here to talk about a specific topic, and we'll be, I'll basically just be your host and moderator today. One of the common misconceptions about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin specifically is that it's a completely anonymous currency and only used for criminal activity because of that reason. And we're going to kind of explore the truth of that today with a couple of expert guests here on the show. The first of those, Rodney, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure, no problem. Hi, everyone. My name is Rodney MacInnes. I am the COO and AML Compliance Ninja at Outlier Compliance Group. I've been in compliance for like 13 or 14 years. I've been in Bitcoin for 9, I think, something like that. And my day-to-day is being a professional outcast. I talk Bitcoin to regulators and I talk regulation to Bitcoiners. So nobody wants to hear what I have to say most of the time.
Well, today everybody wants to hear what you have to say because they want to know all about this stuff. So
success.
And Lauren, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Lorne Lantz. I've been around the Bitcoin space for about 10 years now. So yeah, a few years ago, got scammed on an ICO, just like most people. And, you know, to try and put together an investigation, I couldn't get access to a lot of investigation tools. So I decided to build it myself. And that was about 3.5 years ago. And since then, we've helped out a lot of other people by making these investigation tools easy and accessible through Breadcrumbs. So I'm the founder of Breadcrumbs, and we provide investigation and monitoring tools for everyone.
Fantastic. And I think that providing those tools for everyone includes everybody who's watching today so that they can kind of follow along with some of the stuff that they want to do. If you want to just give everybody the URL and then I think also we've got a special code to give everybody kind of enhanced access for a week to play around with these.
Certainly. So it's www.breadcrumbs.app. This is how you spell breadcrumbs. Like breadcrumbs and .app, and we you know, it's free to use. It's a freemium product, but if you want to get access to some more premium functionality, we provided a coupon code C4 live, capital C4 and then live.
And both of those should be in the streaming chat for you as well. Which I'd also just say, if you have questions during the show that you'd like to get answered by anybody here, go ahead and stick those into the streaming chat and we'll get those as well. And I think that's it. I'm Dirk Anderson. I'm the CIO at Salt Lending and the newbie on the block amongst these guys when it comes to crypto. I came out of information security with a background in cryptography, so it kind of may seem like a natural jump for me to wind up here, but I've only been doing this for about 4.5 years now. So weird when that makes you, young in an industry, right?
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and get started here. We kind of build this as AML and investigations, but I think we're going to kind of actually back into that and start kind of with the investigations a little bit. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about that big question, right? Is crypto really anonymous? Is Bitcoin really anonymous? And Rodney, maybe if you want to kind of touch on that.
This is one of my like as an AML professional, favorite misnomers, because people make this assumption who don't know any better, do stupid things, assuming no one is watching, only to find out, shortly after or even years after, that Bitcoin is not anonymous. It is pseudonymous, but it is definitely not anonymous. While my my public address is not directly linked to my person, if I've, KYC'd myself at an exchange, it's not too difficult to kind of make a connection if you are law enforcement. So you can reach out, find the owner of the hot wallet, say that I received my coins from or sent my coins to, and say, hey, do you have any information on this particular customer that sent from this address? And the exchange would have a request from law enforcement, which they're usually going to follow. And it's pretty easy to kind of connect the dots. And so an immutable ledger, so a ledger that can't be changed, is a really bad place to hide. And so one of my favorite examples of that was the Silk Road takedown, when the law enforcement officers that were involved in the takedown got arrested and charged and convicted well after the fact for Bitcoin that disappeared kind of during that whole fiasco. So despite what you hear or what you think, Bitcoin is definitely not anonymous.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Lorne?
Sure. It's, over time, it's really a game of cat and mouse between, like law enforcement, or there are people who are always trying to tie an identity to a crypto address, because every day publicly we can see all transactions happening. But the challenge is, can you tie an identity to that crypto address? And so this is sort of a cat and mouse game that happens between law enforcement or other types of entities, IRS, that try, IRS is a big one, that'll, because the thing is, every transaction is public and immutable. So it's, it's not like you can go in and change the database values.
Right. Dirk, did we do a wallet session yet, or is that upcoming still?
We did kind of the hardware wallet session, but
hardware
we haven't gone deeper into wallets.
For people watching, if you dig into kind of how wallets function on the Bitcoin blockchain, you'll very quickly understand how simple it is to kind of tie things together.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's not even just about like law enforcement going to exchanges, right? It's like if somebody sends money to you, right? If you give somebody your wallet address and they send money to you, right? Then you can, from that, the wallet they sent it from, your wallet, they know the wallet they sent it from, and now you can start to watch where that crypto goes on the blockchain from that point, right?
Yeah, there's many different ways you can get somebody's crypto address. You'd be surprised and shocked, on Reddit or on Twitter, how many people do self-disclosures without realizing that, the impact of this self-disclosure. So a lot of times you'll see like, hey, we're doing a free NFT giveaway. Put your crypto address here and we'll send you an NFT. Yeah, Rodney. And you just see like hundreds and hundreds of, so now you have like an identity, at least a Twitter account tied to a crypto address.
Right. And all that gets fed into big databases probably and utilized for investigations and.
Depending, yeah. I mean, it really depends on like the threshold, like how accurate it can, how can we trust this address to be tied to that identity? If it's just on Reddit, maybe it's like 50% accuracy. You don't really know. But if it's somebody doing KYC, they give their passports, and it's a high degree of certainty that it's that person's.
Right. So if you've got an immutable blockchain where every transaction is public and recorded, what is the reality of that being used for like, criminal activity and, malicious activity versus say cash?
Go ahead, Rodney. Great question.
That was a loaded one for you, Rodney.
Oh, I love it. Just softball it in there for me. This is the kind of goes back to what I said in the first place, is like the kind of misunderstanding of people that think it will do stupid things not to realize. I've had conversations with, folks long time in the space, talking about do you want to do something now based on the tools that exist currently, that 5 years from now may be blatantly obvious were related to criminal activity? And so this is a lot of, kind of what we see currently is like the blockchain analytics tools that are out there are very sophisticated. And, a crime that I did in 2013, say, buying or selling drugs online or something like that, didn't seem like a big deal then because nobody really could see it and didn't know what was going on. Now, it is really, really easy to find the connection to kind of some of the dark markets. The connection to the individual, a little more difficult, but that's the struggle, is because it's like, it's always there. You can't really run from it. So one of the big, I forget what the volume of it was, but it was a large hack, like I want to say 200 to 300 million. The hacker who took it moved like 8 million of it, mixed it, sent it out, and then gave the rest of it back. And that was because whoever the exchange was basically like, let everybody know. It was very quickly being monitored by all the chain analytics tools and everything else. So it was easy to kind of watch that those stolen tokens or stolen crypto move. And it became much harder to kind of launder that. Where, with cash, even fiat currency, period, I forget which central bank it was, but it was
HSBC.
No, it was a central bank, like a country's
a
bank
country's
got hacked. I think it was Bangladesh, but don't.
Oh, that was
me.
Bangladesh. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was.
Got hacked for like 86 million or something like that, and they didn't get a dime of that back. And like cash is kind of, it's still king. It's hard to trace, and cash has been around long enough that there are pretty sophisticated avenues, excuse me, to get cash into the traditional banking system. So cash is still king without a doubt.
Yeah.
All right.
That was the one with Bangladesh. The money went through the Philippines. They tried putting through $1 billion, but only 86 million went through. And if you, only 86 million. But if you spend time in a lot of developing countries, especially in Asia, there happen to be a lot of casinos in these countries, which, also make it quite easy to, to launder large volumes of cash through, because, some of the bad attributes of cash is it's very difficult to launder large scales of, when you get into like the billions or $500 million amounts of cash, it's very difficult to launder those through. So that takes a lot of effort, but that's one value that like crypto has over cash, is that you could do one transaction, it costs you a $5 transaction fee, and you moved $1 billion, without anyone being able to stop it.
So there are some reasons that it does get used, and I'm certainly not trying to make the claim here that crypto has never been used for malicious reasons, right? I mean, we all know that it has its preferred payment mechanism for ransomware, and for that, I think for that reason, right? Not because it's anonymous necessarily, but because it's easy to move internationally, but not just because of the anonymity of it.
And just one thing to add as well, if you've ever seen the series Breaking Bad, you'll get a pretty good lesson on how to launder money from his lawyer, Saul. But it does require effort. Yeah, exactly. So that there are ways to do it, but it does require more effort. But with the cash, you don't have any tracing. Limited tracing.
Awesome. So before we get into the kind of breadcrumb stuff that we want to have everybody kind of follow along on here in a little bit, Rodney, if you're just like, getting into crypto, maybe starting to study for your CBP, learning how wallets work and all this, what are the most basic ways that you can kind of go see this immutable, ledger of all of these transactions?
Ta-da! A blockchain explorer. So this is blockstream.info. This is their blockchain explorer. It's usually my go-to, and the main reason I like this one is when I'm looking at one of my particular transactions, and these aren't mine. I definitely don't have 300,000 Bitcoin. I wouldn't be talking to you guys if I did, no offense. But you can go in here and you can look at some of the information. And my favorite is when you're looking for a particular transaction, it will tell you what script was used, how much you saved, how much you could have saved if you had have used, say, a Bec32 address or something like that. So this is why I like Blockstream. It kind of entices you to know how to send a more streamlined transaction, taking up less space, which means that you pay less for it. So as you can see on my screen, this is from one of the more recent blocks that was found, and it provides certain details related to that block. So the height is the block number. So if you think about, in your head, a blockchain, we're stacking it vertically in this instance. So the height is the most recent block. So we're always stacking on top. So that's talking about how high the blockchain is going. Status, this is a new block, so there's only one confirmation. If we go back to, say, older blocks, you can see this has got 11 confirmations now. So we are now into a point where it is almost impossible for this to get reversed. You can see the timestamp for when the block was mined. You can see the size of the block in kilobytes. So this one was 1.4 megs. The virtual size is how the weight of the block has been measured, where the size can actually be larger. So that's why you're seeing something over 1 meg, even though that was the limit. It's not. And then the weight units, this one is over my head. I am not 100% how this works. Dirk, do you have insight on that?
No, I don't usually look at
that. So the Merkle root will show you kind of the chain of how the address and kind of nonce got to where we're sitting. The difficulty measurement, so this is the current difficulty for finding the next block. And then the nonce. So the nonce is the header of the block, which will reference the previous block, so that we know the kind of the chain of events within the blockchain, and it will reference back to the previous block to make sure that we are in agreement. Consensus is the word I'm looking for, and that the previous block is referenced in the next block, so that there's, again, a chain of blocks that continue to reference each other. Within this block, you will see tons of transactions. So this one says Coinbase. That's not talking about the US exchange company. That is talking about the amount of Bitcoin that is rewarded to the miner in this block. So this includes the base amount as well as all of the fees that were captured in that block.
Which is where, of course, Coinbase took its name, right?
What?
Well, the domain name was
really
available.
Interesting there, right? Is you're looking at an address, right? So this is the transparency in the transactions moving from address to address, right?
Which is interesting that this is an old, like, non-SegWit address.
Yeah,
I guess the miner hasn't updated. updated their address.
So, and on that you can see, so the reason I'm making the assumption that this is a like an old non-SegWit address is it starts with 1. Old addresses before SegWit will all start with 1. Newer addresses with SegWit start with 3. And then you heard me reference Bec32 before. That is the newest kind of, what would be the term for that? Hash algorithm, hash function for the derivation of the address. And they're smaller, they take up less size, so they cost less. And those ones start with BC1. So then as you look at these, you can kind of click your way through them and see where all of these transactions are going, the amount of inputs and outputs, the amount of Bitcoin that has been sent through that, and you can just keep clicking and clicking. It will just keep going, and you can go back the other direction too.
And that's the fascinating bit, right? Is you can just keep clicking and clicking and tracing where pieces of that initial transaction are moving along to.
Exactly. So here was what I was talking about before, with the fee savings and privacy analysis. So these are some of the items that that Blockstream includes. So you could have saved 27% of the fee that you paid by updating to a Bec32 address. Oh, 36%, excuse me. Even more savings. So much savings.
So many savings. Awesome. So, and there are, I think it's worth mentioning, right, that for Bitcoin and Ethereum in particular, there are a whole crap ton of these blockchain explorers out there. Some of your altcoins may only have the official explorer available to them early on, at least. But there are lots of different ones that you can go to dig through all the transactions.
Here's another one, blockchain.info, or blockchain, this is blockchain.com. Will give very similar information in slightly different formats, but basically the same thing, because it's all getting sourced from the Bitcoin blockchain.
Awesome. So a little bit obtuse, to kind of learn to use and follow and track things through, but the data is all there ultimately, right? So, Lorne, do you want to go ahead and kind of introduce everybody here to Breadcrumbs and how it does blockchain analysis?
Sure, certainly. So we've taken the concept of blockchain analytics. What you've seen here is a blockchain explorer, which is kind of looking at the accounting statements. You know, it's like you're going into QuickBooks and seeing all the transactions go through. What we've done is kind of built a supercharged version of that, where it makes it very easy to get a story out of what happens with the funds. You know, who took the money, where did it come from, who is who, and piece all the information together. Originally, I was going to show you a hack that happened recently that was on Ethereum. I can show that to you afterwards, but since it's certified Bitcoin professional, I brought up, I'll show you guys an example of a Bitcoin event that happens. We'll
still walk through that Ethereum hack for sure in a little bit here, because it's really interesting.
Okay, sure. So when you come to our website, I mean, this is a public report here, and I can send you the link as well afterwards. We have actually in our community activity, people in our community just post in real time different events that happen. But this one, you may remember, was a year ago, the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. So over time, you can kind of gather what was the crypto address, the Bitcoin address, from where the ransom was sent. So here you can see the ransom was actually sent from a Gemini account. And we can actually click on this account and just kind of gather some more information about it. And so the thing that we try to do is we make it very easy to consume this data. As you can see, it's a visualization tool. Generally, the way you read this data is from left to right. Funds generally go from left to right. So if I'm looking at this address, most of the funds came from this address. And then most of the funds went out to the right. You know, so we can actually click on any path. Just close that for a sec. And we can see the transaction that happened here. So this transaction happened on May 8th, a year ago, and 75 Bitcoin. At the time, this was the USD value, $4.3 million. Today, it's, you know, quite a bit less. And of course, you can click on the transaction hash, and it'll take you to a blockchain explorer, kind of like what Rodney showed you, if you want to see the transaction in detail. But that's the key transaction. You know, this is where the ransom was paid. It went to these guys. Now, the ransom was actually done through a piece of software called DarkSide. And the way DarkSide works is it's like ransomware as a service. So the people actually executing the ransomware attack are not actually making the software. They're in order for them to use the software, they have to pay a commission to the software developers. So eventually, when you follow the trail of funds as it goes along, you'll see the actual developers themselves received a percentage of the funds stolen, right? It was 75 Bitcoin. So the developers themselves received 11 Bitcoin from, you know, because they just wrote the software, and then other people go out and yeah, not bad, eh? Not bad for just kind of sitting around and waiting.
I'm not a coder. I don't know how much effort that would take, but like, it's not a bad payout.
Not a bad payout, yeah. And that's just one, right? If you actually, we can look later, you can see you can watch in real time, like all the other ransomware attacks that were done using their software, just by seeing the commissions that went in to their address. So that was about 11 Bitcoin, the other 63.7 Bitcoin. If you follow it down the trail here, eventually it went down to this affiliate. You know, this is the people who did the attack. This is their address. And so we have an address slider that kind of shows, like, you know, hey, when was this address active? You know, who is it? You know, we have people in our community tagging it as well. So
can you, Lorne, can you talk about like people in the community and the tagging and like just expand on that a little?
Sure. So in the beginning of the conversation, we talked about tying an identity to a crypto address. You know, and when you tie an identity to a crypto address, you need to be able to do that with a high degree of certainty, right? If somebody goes on Twitter or on Reddit and says, hey, this is Rodney's crypto address. If I go on and say, this is Rodney's crypto, yeah, Rodney's like, no. So that's not a high degree of certainty, right? But if Rodney goes on, let's say he goes on TV or a live stream like this, and he, you know, in real time, he sends me some Bitcoin, and then we look at that transaction hash. That's pretty good with a high degree of certainty that we know that address is Rodney's, and then the one receiving is probably mine. So this is kind of the balance that we do when it comes to tagging a crypto address to an entity or an identity. So how do
community sourced data?
So yeah, with stuff from the community, we generally ask them to give us a reason why. Like, how do they know? You know, so this person here, oh, that was me. Well, actually, so the way we were able to tag this was through, so we have some people in our community that this is what they do full-time. They're full-time crypto investigators, and they used a series of techniques using publicly available data given out by the FBI. But using that and cross-referencing it with other data, they were able to extrapolate, whose addresses these belong to.
In the compliance nerd world, we refer to that as open source intelligence.
Yeah.
Yes, that is a keyword. Will you have that on one of your tests? Oh, OSINT.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So open source intelligence, very important. And so this is kind of how we were able to extrapolate this whole story out of this. So eventually the funds ended up at this address, and it was just in there for a while. And then shortly before the FBI announced that they had seized the funds, this transaction happened June 7th. And so they were able to gather, well, actually 127 Bitcoins. So there's probably funds from other events as well, sitting on those servers. And so what happened here, it's not like the FBI hacked Bitcoin, which was kind of a misconception that was out in the media at the time. Instead, what happened was the private key was stored on some server that the FBI was able to get access to. The private key to this address. And anybody who has the private key to this address can move funds out of it. And so that's how, the FBI eventually seized those funds. And then, kind of over time, afterwards, they were moving it out as well. Usually after seizure, they then auction off the Bitcoin at a later time. It goes through a whole bureaucratic process. So yeah, just in one image here, you can kind of gather an entire story of an event that occurred.
And I think it is really, I think it's good to point that out again, this being the CBP program, right? That the importance of the private keys. We've talked in the past about the importance of protecting your private keys, because once somebody has the private keys, they own the crypto. And that it's analogous to if the FBI showed up at your house and you had written down the combination to a safe on a slip of paper, and they picked up that piece of paper, right, and then went and opened the safe. It's not that they actually broke into the safe or hacked the safe, right? They just got the combination that they needed to be able to open it.
That's right. So I can show you more examples if you like, more interactive examples, or would that be helpful?
Yeah, let's come back around to that in just a minute. And you
Sure.
can just leave that up here, because I would, I definitely would like to walk through that a little bit, but I would like to take a minute here because this is, we want to talk about the value of this and what the kind of, obviously there's the obvious just kind of investigative uses for this, right? But I'd also like to talk a little bit about AML, starting maybe with a definition of what that is, Rodney, and kind of what the requirements are around that, right? What the kind of the point of AML is.
So AML is a lesser known acronym, but most people know what KYC is. KYC being a know your customer, which is a operational requirement for AML. AML stands for anti-money laundering. The other acronym that goes along is usually either ATF or CTF, which is anti-terrorist financing or counter-terrorist financing. And these are the legislation, like the rules in place around the world to slow down money laundering and block terrorist financing being the ideal outcome. The recommendations is what they are that come down from FATF, which is the Financial Action Task Force, which is a group that kind of sets the bar for what needs to be done by a country to meet their AML obligations. And so while this all comes from one central place within the AML world, each country takes the recommendations and puts their own little spin on it. So that's why AML is different everywhere you go. It's generally the same, but there are nuances between every country. So I myself am Canadian, in case you can't tell by my accent, which anyways, our legislation is just a little different than the US legislation. Being a Canadian, my expertise is Canadian centric. I know US legislation reasonably well. I know UK legislation reasonably well, European legislation reasonably well. But I don't sit in on American exams. I don't sit in on European exams. So I don't know exactly what the regulatory expectation is. This is a big item with AML that is a common misunderstanding, similar to the anonymity piece. And we kind of joke with an outlier that AML is kind of like a language. So Lorne, I assume you speak more than one language. Dirk, you maybe speak a language or two. That's a perfect example right there. I speak Canadian AML really, really well. I speak US and European AML like passable, but I wouldn't write a business agreement in either of those languages. AML is the same. If you're looking for AML from a specific country, find someone who's boots on the ground in that specific country. Excuse me, a global AML expert is not a thing. That is an impossible task. So be cautious of anyone who claims that thing, because we do see it every now and then, especially in the crypto space. You want local boots on the ground. And so AML basically sets out a set of kind of program obligations. In Canada and the US, it is policies and procedures and a risk assessment. So policy being, what are the requirements, procedures being, how do you meet those requirements, and a risk assessment that assesses the likelihood or possibility that your business could be used to launder money and finance terrorism. It will document the controls that you have in place to mitigate that risk. And that is a difficult undertaking. It's not easy to kind of look at the broad scope of what you do and know where your vulnerabilities are. The other portion of that is the operational piece. So you've written down what you're going to do. Now you're going to follow what you say you're going to do. Operationally, you're going to be identifying your customers, so that KYC piece. You're going to be monitoring your transactions. Lorne helping to see kind of what's going on in the background. And like, frankly, in today's day and age, if you're an exchange, you're going to have a pretty heavy expectation that you're using some sort of blockchain analytics tool. Not necessarily from a regulatory perspective, but your banking service provider will definitely have that as an expectation. And I mean, if you were watching when I went through the Blockchain Explorer, yes, it's all there and it's all immutable and it's not going anywhere, but it's garbage data at that point unless you have the details. And so looking through the presentation that Lorne provided, you can see that there's the detail that you need. You can see that, this is the dark side address. That's the Colonial Pipeline hacker address. That's the collection address. That's the FBI address. Those are the things that you need to be effective in that monitoring piece. The other element related to AML is the reporting. So I'm sure everybody's heard of STRs or SARs in the US, of a suspicious activity report. There's other reports based on jurisdictions. So US, you're going to have a CTR, which is a currency transaction report of cash 10,000 or more. Canada, ours is an LCTR, which is a large cash transaction. There are other reports that go to kind of the financial intelligence unit, which is the kind of the body that kind of watches what goes on and keeps track of all those reports and then discloses them to law enforcement where patterns are observed or they are requested. I talk AML all the time. I could spend the whole hour talking about it, so I'm going to cap it there. If you want to know more and need good bedtime reading, just type like US AML legislation and start reading. It's a good read.
And it'll help you get to sleep. So
absolutely fast.
So I want to just step back and kind of recapture what you were talking about there, kind of big picture with what we've been talking about. So the idea is, right, we have data like we've been looking at here, right? We know that this Bitcoin, for example, came from this ransomware hack. We know who our customers are, right? We do our KYC. So as an exchange, or we're a lender at Salt, or whoever, whatever it is business you're involved in, we know who our customers are. And if we see crypto coming from suspicious activities in the past, right? Crypto coming in, we need to be monitoring for that and then reporting on that, when we see that sort of thing. And so that's kind of the big picture idea around AML, right? Is that if we see it coming in from places or going out to places like known terrorists, the known terrorists like OFAC lists in the US and, that sort of thing, then that sort of thing gets reported on, right?
I think a key element to touch on is money laundering, and like, what is it? Because that's not well understood either. And the idea, like, it's called laundering for a reason, because you get dirty money and you want to make it look clean. So step one of money laundering is funds derived from crime. So you're looking at proceeds of crime, and you're going to move those kind of through whatever avenue or network to make them appear legitimate on the other side. And this is where, kind of the cash piece gets difficult, because anybody who's ever tried to do anything with a reasonably large size amount of cash will get a lot of questions, get a lot of identification that needs to be provided, the source of where it came from, and so on and so on and so on. And that's the reason is like, as we said before, cash is still kind of king when it comes to crime. And so when trying to stem the flow of illegal money, you're looking at really like step one, trying to establish, is it proceeds of crime? Cash, that is harder, not impossible, and definitely doable, but harder to prove the source. Where with crypto, it's less so. If I just got a transfer from Lorne or some random address, it's harder to determine if that was good or bad. But if it came from something that is obviously connected to a dark web market or a known scam address or something like that, it's real easy to be like, chances are that's proceeds of crime.
Right. So in the cash case, right, you have $1 million that you stole from a bank, right? And you can't just walk in and deposit it into your own bank account, because they're going to be like, where's that $1 million come from? And if you have no reasonable explanation for how you got that $1 million. So traditional money laundering is you open up a laundromat or a pizza joint or whatever, right? Just as an example, and you funnel it through that in smaller, reasonable sort of amounts into your bank account. In crypto, that's really hard right now, actually, because crypto doesn't have a lot of like retail or like common sort of like uses, right? Because it's still a developing currency. So it's actually easier from that standpoint. When you throw that on top of your immutable record here, then it becomes actually kind of difficult to do that.
Absolutely.
So awesome. So yeah, no, I think that's good. And I think one of the things I just talk about maybe in in reference to what you were talking about there, and maybe Lorne can talk a little bit about how this gets tracked, right? Is that because different regulatory organizations might have slightly different rules, because there might be slightly different rules depending on what industry you're in and taking currency, right? I know that there obviously it seems obvious, at least, that you don't want to take money that came from a hack, or that you don't want to send money to people who are going to use it to blow up buildings or whatever, right? I mean, those seem fairly obvious, but there's a lot of other stuff that kind of gets monitored along the way here too, right? Including like proceeds from gambling or other things like that. That, I mean, it might be perfectly legal where I live in Colorado to buy your pot with Bitcoin, but then that just doing that and then using that same Bitcoin, somewhere else might, flag, throw up some flags for people.
Yeah, we see a lot of, conducting effectiveness reviews. So there's another obligation under AML, and that's a test of your compliance program. When we do those, that we see a lot of flags related to gambling. Canada just recently, like Ontario just recently, started to allow online gambling, and And so before anything related to gambling was flagged, because in Canada, you have to kind of go outside of Canada to do that. And so while it's not inherently illegal, it is definitely a risk factor. And I think Lorne could probably talk better into kind of how risk is considered and scored within a blockchain analytics tool.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was pushing towards. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of risk, it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So, for example, in one country, they may not consider money coming from a Bitcoin ATM to be considered high risk. But in other places, Bitcoin ATMs deal with a lot of cash. So in other places, it might be considered risky. So customization is required, but the first part of coming up with a risk score is really making it usable. So simple that it's usable. Is it a score from 0 to 100? Is it a score from 1 to 4? Is it a color-coded score? And then how do you categorize it? So we've gone through these kind of conversations over the years, actually with Rodney a few times too. And so that's one part of it. For us, what we do is we just have a low, medium, high, and severe. Severe being the darknet markets, the terrorist financing, ransomware, like child exploitation. The worst one is OFAC. This is a sanctions list that the US government puts out. They've been doing that a lot lately with the war in Russia. So those are the worst ones. And then you kind of have like your highs, which may be funds coming from mixers. A mixer is, a programmatically built system, either on Bitcoin or on Ethereum, on different blockchains, where you put your funds in and it kind of gets mixed up with other people's funds and it gets spit out. Is that high risk or not? So generally we would put that as like medium or high risk, depending on, who the user is. So I'll just kind of stop it there.
Yeah, no, because it's an intentional effort to avoid the transparency of the blockchain that we've been talking about, right?
Right.
So there might be legitimate reasons for that. There might be people, if you live in countries with, political issues and stuff like that, right?
Yep.
There might be absolutely legitimate reasons, just like anything, for doing those.
Absolutely.
Things. But yeah. So one other thing I just wanted to touch on real quickly, and then Lorne, maybe we'll jump into your other example here, is the, you mentioned, Rodney, the FATF, the FATF, and so we've been talking a lot about like how organizations have to do KYC, and the FATF has, in the last, I guess it's been probably over a year now because time flies, issued a thing called the travel rule around KYC and knowing who your customers are and having to transmit that information with certain types of transactions and stuff. You want to touch on that maybe? Because I think it talks to the fact that like one organization knows who you are, and now maybe other organizations know who you are as well, right?
Yep. So everyone, I hope, is familiar with what the SWIFT network is, which is kind of how money moves around the world currently, where not actually money moving around, it's just a bunch of ones and zeros, and they're sending data to say like, I owe you this much and you owe me this much, and nothing, like no money is actually changing hands.
And this is like bank to bank. This is traditional finance network that you're talking about here.
Thank you. Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
In that world, there is what is called the travel rule, and what that says is that the information about the transaction must travel with the transaction. So they built this complex network to say that I'm sending money from A to B, and this is me, this is my account number, and this is who is the recipient of that money on the other end. And so that was kind of the travel rule built in the traditional fiat system, which was like pretty straightforward because you're sending an electronic message that everybody in the world is kind of connected to, which probably sounds familiar when we're talking about Bitcoin. However, like there's a won't get into the actual level, but there's a reasonable level of security with having your money flying around the world with your name attached to it. When it comes to Bitcoin, because you're dealing with individuals, that security is greatly reduced. And so you just can't mimic the exact same way that is done by, well, just in, the operaturn, put your name and your account number and your address and a bunch of other private, like, no, private information does not belong on a blockchain, period, ever. It's a terrible idea. So with the travel rule, we're trying to mimic the kind of how the Swift network works, but in a separate standalone system. And so it's been a massive struggle, because you really can't make Bitcoin function the way the traditional finance system functions. So we're in kind of this limbo where we're trying to build a separate system to kind of stand beside it, so that information can be passed along. And there are solutions out there that are working to solve this. The struggle is kind of the interoperability with those different solutions connecting to each other. So unless everybody's on the same standard or the same system, it gets really hard to pass that information along securely. And so this is one of the struggles that we've been dealing with for a couple of years now. Like, the funny part is this has been a rule in the US since like 2013. Canada implemented it in full in 2021, I believe. But this has all been a requirement. It's just understood that there is no path to compliance on this thing. Once it gets sorted out, that will be a thing. I wish there was a better way instead of just doing what we've always done. But this is kind of the world that we live in and the state that we're at. Be aware that as a person watching this video, you are not captured under the travel rule. The travel rule is specific to exchanges, regulated entities, folks that are required to follow the legislation I've been referring to. That is not on an individual level. So the AML that I'm talking about doesn't apply to you as a human, but if you start a business that is regulated under AML, then it would apply to you. Similarly, if you're a human that offers services or businesses, so if like you sell Bitcoin as a business, but it's just you personally doing it, you would technically be captured under most regulations, at least in Canada and the US for sure. But know that the travel rule doesn't apply to, Lorne and I's transaction that we referred to earlier. There are exceptions to that, which I won't get into, but just know that generally as a human, it doesn't apply to you.
Awesome, thanks. But I knew this would happen because I knew that this would be really interesting talk stuff, right? And so we're coming up on towards the end of our hour here. I do want to give you, Lorne, a chance to kind of showcase maybe a slightly different kind of transaction here.
Sure.
And I also do want to just mention again, if you have any specific questions, please go ahead and throw them into the chat, and we'll try to get those answered here in the little bit of time remaining as well. I mean, as long as everybody here can go over a little bit, we might go over just a little bit, but yeah.
Great. So what I'll do is I'll show you a recent hack that happened back in April. This was one of the largest hacks ever in crypto. It was about $600 million was stolen from the Axie Infinity bridge. So I just pulled up the, how did I know that this was the address that hacked the funds? Well, shortly after the hack actually happened, Axie Infinity announced it publicly. Hey, we've been hacked, here's the address. And so everybody started going nuts. So you can see here, so this is in March 23rd. It was 173,000 ETH, which at the time was $500 million. And then they also took 25 million USDC. So that's kind of the rake. At the time, we were like, oh, who took the funds, blah, blah. As you can see now, it's pretty clear. So the way we found out, who was the entity that actually took the funds was OFAC. They put it on their sanctions list. They put these addresses on their sanctions list and attached it to the Lazarus group in North Korea. It's a hacking group out of North Korea. So you can imagine, yeah. So, this is obviously dirty money, and going over the whole money laundering thing. Nobody wants to facilitate the flow of these funds. So as an investigator, just for your students here, anytime you look up any address, it'll always show up in the middle. Everything incoming's on the left, everything outgoing's on the right. So as time went on, we're all wondering, hey, what are they doing with the money? Where's it going to go? It's kind of
before
like—
you move on there, Lorne, just a quick question. Would you start to make assumptions about there? So there were a few addresses there at the bottom that weren't identified as the Lazarus group. Would you start to make assumptions about whether those belong to the Lazarus group as well?
Yeah, these probably belong to it as well. I mean, this main address that took the funds belongs to it. Pretty much anything that's downstream belongs to it. We just haven't fully tagged them all. Yeah. So our tool makes it easy to start following the flow of funds. So all you got to do is hover over any address, and we have this navigation button. So all you have to do is just click on expand outgoing, and you can start to get a little picture of, hey, where's the money going? Any guesses as to what they did with the funds?
Pick me.
Oh, okay. You saw the cheat sheet a little earlier.
Okay. I wasn't looking.
Oh, really? Okay. So where do you think it goes?
Tornado cash.
Well, let's see. Oh, look at that. Yes. So yeah, everything kind of flows back into Tornado Cash.
And kind of as a FYI for folks, Tornado Cash is a mixer. And we even know who created Tornado Cash. He's very publicly stated that he created it and that it's unstoppable and that there's nothing that can be done now. It's just code that runs on the internet, which is kind of amazing, but also kind of terrifying.
Yeah, and so this is, if you're trying to launder $500 million in crypto, this is the way you do it. You run it through a mixer. But even then, it's still such a large amount of funds to launder, so even coming out the other end, it's still quite a lot. It's still quite difficult to hide because it's such a large amount. But if you're to do this with cash,
every input into the mixer, right, because you're mixing multiple funds together, and if all of the inputs into the mixer come from a single source, then all of the stuff coming out the other side in that transaction can be tagged back to it, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like how much liquidity is in there. Like if you're putting in $500 million worth of ETH into here, but only a total of $10 million of ETH went into here, it's it's clear that most of the funds going out is going to be related to this.
Right.
The other fun thing we see a lot is funds go into a mixer, and then when they come out the other side, they can consolidate it into a single address and the exact same amount that they went in as, which totally just wasted money paying your mixing fee because it's very easy to kind of see where that went.
Right.
Exactly. So yeah, that's kind of a quick demonstration of how powerful the tool is, where you can trace the flow of money, where it went, or the other way, where it came from.
And I think looking at that picture, when I pulled up the blockchain explorer, could you imagine trying to figure this out on that screen, just looking at the number of addresses in there? Even if you had the information and knew which addresses belonged to Tornado Cash and Lazarus Group, that's a huge undertaking when you watch Lorne do it in a matter of minutes.
Now that's a lot of Excel pivot table work.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, I have one question from our audience. That is, as a First Nations investigator in Canada and the USA, does it matter legally if the hack takes place from tribal land, which has separate laws?
Ooh, Rodney.
Wow, good one. I'm going to say not a lawyer, not a legal opinion. There would probably be some burden of proof on that thing. And I don't know. That's a fantastic question. I mean, I remember back when I was doing like traditional MSB activity. I had a client who was on sovereign land and was able to kind of step outside of the traditional set forth rules and regulations. I don't know how that would necessarily play out, and I'm not familiar with how kind of the law is set forth within those environments. So that would be a good kind of a good starting point would be to figure out if whatever you're looking at, like, would that be considered illegal within whatever territory that you are referring to. Fantastic question.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, but I think, I mean, I kind of conceptualize it the same as if an exchange gets hacked in Singapore, right? That doesn't mean that it's not stolen, and that everybody becomes aware of it, right? And we're aware that it's stolen funds. Really, then it comes down to what do the AML rules say in the US, right? If we see that currency coming into the US and we know it was stolen money, right, it doesn't really kind of matter where it was stolen necessarily, right?
Yeah, I think with
the rules of wherever the AML is being applied are really what are going to go into effect there.
Well, and like what's legal and what's not legal. Like, is it legal to sell whatever thing that might be illegal outside of that territory? Like, you get into very like subjective and questionable territory that I really can't answer because I am not sure, and those will vary wildly depending on where you're talking about. But I think like Dirk said, if you're looking at something, the other factor you got to consider is where you're exiting to. So while whatever you did may not be considered a crime, in that specific territory, if you're then moving out to like a Coinbase or a Gemini or something, those are going to have like general regular US legislative requirements. So it's similar to the gambling reference we were talking about before, where for a long time gambling was illegal in Canada. And so when you received proceeds from gambling, I'm not saying it was illegal or anything like that, but it was definitely questioned pretty heavily about the source and where it came from, because if it was derived from gambling that took place inside of Canada, you were then looking at proceeds of crime. If it was from the Cayman Islands or something like that, it is technically legal in that country, and it gets very very nuanced from there. But excellent question. Well done.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're about 5 minutes over here, but that was as I expected, a fantastic conversation. Thank you both so much for participating, for being here today. And again, Lorne, if you want to give a shout out to the breadcrumbs product here, it's
certainly
a very cool product to just go play with. I've done that in the past, trying to track down some things, and it is a very, very fun tool.
Yeah, great starting point is just look up some of your personal addresses or some of your friends' addresses and see what kind of information you can gather from that.
And then scare your friends.
Yeah, and scare exactly. Well, scare yourself, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a freemium product. We're the only ones that do this to support the community. So you can go and play around with it, and then we have the coupon code C4 Live if you want to sign up for one of the premium plans, the basic plan. You get a full month free for that.
And with the regular just login, you can trace back two transactions?
No, so with the free plan, it's 50 hops per month.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, it's when you're logged out, when you haven't signed up yet. You get a limit of 1 or 2.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So signing up is free, just in your email. Email password.
It's also fun to go in and play with, and like Lauren said, look at your own transaction and see what information is out there about your transactions. It will make you better at privacy.
Where your money came from too. It's interesting, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate your being here, and have a great afternoon, evening, whatever it is, wherever you are.